WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. I don't know if this is a positive development or not. I guess it is for Mrs. Yanda and the Yanda kids, and certainly for some young buck that's going to be starting here and having huge turf shoes to fill, Luke Jones. But Marshal Yanda going to retire. Not a shock to any of us who sort of followed the movie here, and we've been hinting at this. Hell, Marshall's been hinting at this for a year, right? And bringing his family down for group photos and all the things we've talked about. But lo and behold, at some point in the overnight on Monday night, if the coronavirus doesn't get us, Marshal Yanda will not be back this season.
Yeah, and no matter how you slice it, even if it wasn't a big surprise, even if it's something that he's pondered for a couple years now, it's a big loss. This is one of the best players in franchise history, and unlike a Ray Lewis or an Ed Reed or a Jonathan Ogden or even Terrell Suggs, Haloti Ngata.
Or even Joe Flacco, who was a first-round draft pick, right?
All of those guys that we just mentioned were first-round picks, were guys who were supposed to be as important as they ended up being to this franchise. Now, you don't predict a Hall of Fame career for anyone. It's just you don't foresee that even for the first overall pick. You typically don't think of that player as a future Hall of Famer until you get at least 5, 6, 7 years down the road and you see what happens. But what makes Marshal Yanda so unique is that he embrace the grind, as he famously said during one training camp practice back in 2012. This is an individual who started out rookie year, ended up making a bunch of starts, played right tackle. Second year, tears his ACL, serious knee injury. Third year, comes back, and he's kind of a super backup because Chris Chester was kind of handling right guard, and Yanda was moving around and played but didn't really have a position. He gets to his fourth year, 2010, they move him back to right tackle. So you kind of think about how his first 4 years went and then what his career became after that, making the Pro Bowl 8 of his final 9 seasons. That's impressive, and that really speaks to someone's toughness, their fortitude, their ability to play, obviously, but he persevered through a lot. And I can recall it was late last season when the Pro Bowl announcements had just come up. I approached Marshall at his locker and just said, does this get old, making the Pro Bowl all these years? And he said, it's pretty cool. And he even pointed out to me, as we were kind of just talking about his career, that it took him those first 4 years to really settle into one position, one spot, the same responsibilities week in and week out. And for him to walk away with as more Pro Bowls than anyone in the organization other than Ray Lewis, Jonathan Ogden, and Ed Reed, that's pretty impressive, unique, elite company there. So the Ravens are definitely going to miss him, but this is a day to celebrate for Marshal Yanda in what, for my money, should be a Hall of Fame career. Maybe it's not a first ballot because we know how interior offensive linemen oftentimes have to wait their turn, probably have been underrepresented, but I see no reason why Marshal Yanda isn't worthy of Canton one day.
Well, it is a fascinating conversation because the first thing is how do we fill his shoes, right? What are the Ravens going to do? Where's the cap money? All of that stuff. But then there's 5 years from now, Garceau or whoever walks into the room and makes a presentation. How is that received? How is that accepted? Part of this is, and I've seen this over 25 years, and for every Howard Balzer we have on, or every Ira Kaufman we have on, or Goose Goslin, Borges, all these guys, Clark Judge, that are all voters, Peter King that I have on the show all the time, it's cyclical, right? There was a point where the wide receivers couldn't get in, and then the safeties are underrepresented. And, oh, my God, we've got to put Ray Guy in, and we've got to have Jan Stenner, and the thing does go sort of in waves in different ways. And I think the quarterbacks, the running backs, the wide receivers, they're always sort of easy to spot and easy to have statistics for. It's a lot different for Randall McDaniel. It just is.
Yeah, it really is. You just said it. It's all about statistics. I think you could look at defensive linemen compared to edge rushers or cornerbacks that are picking off passes, or even even inside linebackers like Ray Lewis, who you can cite having 150 tackles every year. So it is difficult in that way. But I think what Marshal Yanda and players of this era have going for them is the emergence of Pro Football Focus with grading and putting a number next to their name, even if people want to dispute that. And believe me, I'm not saying PFF is the gospel of football evaluation, but they are a group, an outlet that has tried to quantify play going beyond just simple statistics, where prior to the PFF era, all you had to really go on for offensive linemen is, okay, you would kind of see some record keeping for sacks allowed, but even that is very subjective as far as not knowing what the assignment of each offensive lineman is, and if a team or an opponent tries to twist or stun or blitz, how that was supposed to go. But and you had the eyeball test, of course, which works for the absolute best of the best. But if you're looking at someone like a Marshal Yanda, for example, who his first 4 years bounced around and was hurt and didn't have a position, I think Pro Football Focus has been such a good outlet for players like Yanda to really be recognized and to shine a light on how elite he's been for a long time. I mean, we can debate Pro Bowls and the merit of making the Pro Bowl, and we do that every year. We talk about guys that make it who shouldn't. We talk about guys who are snubbed. But Marshal Yanda, 8 of the last 9 years, he's been pretty darn legit in every one of those years, other than maybe 1 year that comes to mind, maybe 2013, which, was a year he was coming off shoulder surgery. So he's not someone who just made it based on reputation. He earned it year in and year out. And when you look at that, when you look at the fact that Pro Football Focus has been singing his praises for years, I think that's absolutely going to help him once that day does come and he is a name that comes up in that room.
You know what helps him a lot is having guys like Baldinger on TV and having interior linemen to explain what he does. That a Tony Baselli's an announcer. Having announcers that just aren't, Tony Romo. No offense to Tony Romo, who's well compensated and worth every penny. But I do think that explaining the game of football more, I don't think it needs to be explained to the 50 people in the room, right? And I think now and if we're just going to talk Hall of Fame, right? I mean, we're talking Baseball Hall of Fame is an ish show now, right? I mean, we talk about this every year, about Curt Schilling and about how the balloting is done and how the mystery ballots are cast and how somebody, oh my God, someone left my guy, Derek Jeter, off the ballot or whatever. The football thing's a little bit more like they gather them. I see it every year. I watch these guys. I talk to them the day before. I talk to them the day after. They set the room up now. They talk about these guys, the Tony Grossies. The stories get told, about what happens and what's said and all that stuff. Maybe not transparently, but certainly for people in the circle. And in the case of Marshal Yanda, I would think if you're making a case for him, the case on television and the case on the internet doesn't matter. It's the 50 people in the room who sort of know football. And I sort of get the vibe that he'll get in. And like you, I don't think it'll be 2025. It might be 27, 28, 29. But he'll wait his turn, and there will be a lobby for Marshal Yanda. And the lobby for Marshal Yanda will probably begin with like John Ogden, right? Or, or other offensive linemen that are in the game, or defensive linemen that get into the Hall of Fame or banging around that he played against. I think there will be a very favorable case for him, and I think it's different if you have like a Heisman vote or like the baseball vote where who knows who gets a card. I think the football thing, pretty astute people, and it will be talked about, and I don't think there will be a case against Marshal Yanda.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at the history of this franchise now, I mean, they've had 3 first-ballot Hall of Famers in Ogden, Lewis, and Reed. At some point, you're going to have someone that comes along, and I'd also throw Terrell Suggs into this conversation as well, where maybe it's not seen as clear-cut, as slam dunk, as obvious as those other 3, where those other 3 you could talk about making an argument as the best at their position in the history of the game, or at least one of the very, very best. I don't know if anyone views Marshal Yanda in that kind of light, but that said, when you've made 8 Pro Bowls, when you've been arguably the best at your position for a 6, 7, 8-year period, that's typically the kind of stuff that's going to look good when you're in the room, or when you're getting down to the semifinalists and the finalists and understanding how that process works. So I think that's where he is going to have a lot of advocates. And as you mentioned, you have your tape junkies that love him, and Pro Football Focus, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, has really talked him up and graded him at a very high level for a long time. So, you mentioned it, Jonathan Ogden, a guy that he only played with 1 year. Ogden was on the way out as Marshall was just still wet behind the ears and still green and finding his way. But I think he's going to have people that are advocating for him. Not that he's going to ask for it. I fully expect Marshall to be asked about the Hall of Fame, and he'll probably brush it off and say that that's not something he can control. But he's going to have a lot of people that are really sticking up for him in that way. And also, let's keep in mind, Super Bowl champion as well. Unfortunately, could have been a 2-time Super Bowl champion, if not what happened in January. And I think that's one reason people were hoping he'd come back. But I think his legacy, sure, could he have played another couple years and made another Pro Bowl or two and made it an absolute slam dunk and maybe been a first ballot guy then? Perhaps, but that's never been what Marshal Yanda's been about. He's been a guy who, if he's there, he wants to be all in, and he's there for the team. And clearly he's at a point in his life, and he has 3 kids and a wife, and is a family guy, an Iowa guy, and I think he knows it's time. And if that's the decision he makes, then everyone should respect that, because he's a guy who left absolutely everything on the field for the Ravens for 13 seasons.
Well, now what does this do for the Ravens, right? We could talk Hall of Fame. We could talk Marshall. He made a lot of money. He's getting out, pretty healthfully, as you pointed out at the end. I mean, he looked so good, so strong, so happy. He was so upbeat. It is really disappointing that it didn't go out with a chance to go to Miami for him. I mean, he loved that kid quarterbacking, right? You know what I mean? Like you could see a little glimmer in him that I think really Eric DeCosta and John Harbaugh and Greg Roman and the guys around the team felt like maybe he was having so much fun that he would come back. You know what I mean? Like maybe we really believe that. Now that he's gone, though, I'm sure there was a plan when Eric DeCosta and John Harbaugh got together with the brass and Steve Bisciotti down in Jupiter a couple of weeks ago. They knew this was a likely scenario, not a probable scenario when it came to him. They have a plan. Now they have to go and act their plan. Luke Jones, what's the plan, man?
Well, I think that's the interesting question at this point. But to what you just said, the Ravens aren't caught off guard by this. They have been preparing quietly this offseason as though Marshal Yanda wasn't going to be back. They were hoping he would come back for all the reasons you just stated, and he was very direct, very honest about saying he thought this was the best team he had ever played on. And Marshal Yanda is a Joe Flacco guy, so it's no knock on previous teams that he played with. It's just really that much of a compliment to Lamar Jackson and the 2019 Ravens that Marshal Yanda enjoyed himself that much. But when you played 13 years, you understand that it's not always going to be that way, and you're not just going to roll the ball out and be 14-2 again in 2020. So that his chapter comes to an end, but the Ravens continue, and I think what's going to be very interesting is you just look at the state of the interior of this offensive line. You have Bradley Bozeman at left guard. Okay, check. He's not a Pro Bowl player, but I thought he played well last year. I thought he was solid in his first year as a starter, and I think you can feel okay about him at left guard. But now you have a center spot where Matt Skura is coming back from a very serious knee injury, and it's unclear when he'll be ready to go. He's hoping by training camp, but he hurt his knee in late November. So you have either him or Patrick McCarry, who played well at the end of last year, but he was a rookie free agent. So there's still probably a little bit of question there. And then right guard, is it Ben Powers, who the Ravens drafted in the 4th round last year, and he played only one game, played in the regular season finale against Pittsburgh. do you feel you need to go out and sign a veteran that might not be, I mean, let's face it, whoever they bring in isn't going to be Marshal Yanda. We get that. Everyone understands that. But do you add another veteran who at least has some starting experience and you kind of view as your safety or as your insurance policy, your safety net in case Ben Powers or anyone else they might draft isn't quite ready to go? To me, that's something you do explore because the one positive about Marshal Yanda retiring, and it's really trying to put a silver lining, finding the silver lining, is they do clear another $7 million in cap space.
Well, there you go. So, I mean, that's fine.
Yeah, and you have to replace the player, but you do have some nice resources to try to do that. Now, I'm not going to sit here and try to act like I'm Mr. Expert offensive line guru. Anyone you bring in that even is a veteran with a little bit of starting experience, you're talking about a pretty substantial drop-off there. So you hope, in a perfect world, the Ravens either feel confident that Ben Powers or they draft someone in, say, the first 2 or 3 rounds next month that can step in and be the long-term solution there. But what I will say, and I've said this to you before, I've written this at WNST.net, let's keep in mind, before people start panicking and looking at the middle of that offensive line that I just mentioned, has some very clear question marks now. They have an all-pro left tackle who was the best left tackle in the game last year in Ronnie Stanley. They have an ascending, it was originally an alternate, but ended up playing in the Pro Bowl, right tackle in Orlando Brown Jr. So they have bookend offensive tackles who I'd take against anyone else in the league right now. So you feel really good about that. And also keep in mind, they have number 8 at quarterback, whose athleticism, his unbelievable athletic traits that he has, his speed, his change of direction.
He can run behind any guard, Luke Jones.
Well, what that is, he can run behind any guard, and you could line up any 5 guys in front of him. And I'm not saying the Ravens should do this, to be clear.
Not me and you by any means.
Any 5 guys in front of him, and those 5 guys are going to be better than they would be with any other quarterback. Why? Because a defensive line and the linebackers, a front 7, can't play against the Lamar Jackson front the same way that they play against any other front. So for that reason there, and believe me, that's a big reason why the Ravens were a record-setting offense in 2019. That's where you do take a deep breath and say, okay, whoever is coming in to replace Marshal Yanda, it's not going to be a guy who's going to make 8 Pro Bowls over the next 9 years. You can't expect anything like that. I mean, heck, the Ravens spent a decade truly finding the replacement for Jonathan Ogden after going through option after option. But having Lamar Jackson under center, really shouldn't say under center. He's in the pistol. You have him. That makes the job of that offensive line that much easier because you just can't crash inside and be as aggressive because you're playing 11-on-11 football rather than 11-on-10 like it is with any other quarterback. So just keep those variables in mind when you're looking at this and saying, oh my gosh, how are they going to replace Marshal Yanda? I mean, you never truly replace a guy who's a Hall of Fame kind of player.
Yeah, I was sitting with Ed Reed on Monday night. He was making Matt Elam jokes. I don't know if you knew that or not.
You never replace a guy like that.
It was funny, though. Frank Kelly, it was at the Fellowship of Christian Athlete, a wonderful night out of Martins West, and it was the funniest thing Ed said all night. He said something to the effect of, if this wouldn't have happened, if that wouldn't have happened, if the woman who took him in for 2 years in Louisiana hadn't taken him, he said, y'all would have had like Matt Elam or something. And it was
who just got cut in the XFL again.
Oh
so.
Man, poor Matt Elam. But But the point being well made, right? That we said replacing Joe Flacco would be difficult, and look at how easy that was, right? But the Ray Lewis thing, poor C.J. Mosley, not poor, but you come in behind that. John Ogden, obviously, whatever Ronnie Stanley is at this point, and you and Pro Football Focus would say the best left tackle in the, for what he has to do. If he had to drop back and protect the quarterback 58 times a game or something, it might be a little different, be a different job, right? But in this offense, he's also a perfect guy that it does become difficult to replace those kinds of players.
It does. And think about it. From Jonathan Ogden, you had what? Jared Gaither and Adam Terry and Michael Orr and Bryant McKinney and
Ja Reed. Don't forget him.
Eugene Monroe, who they gave a bunch of money to and was a terrible contract. That's probably the worst contract they've done. So you had a long list of guys that, guys like Bryant McKinney worked out well for 1 year and one postseason.
Well, you've just named a lot of left tackles in one period of time where the answer to that question was John Ogden, over with, done, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
But you also pay for that on the cap, then and now.
No question. And you mentioned Ed Reed. Look how many safeties they've gone through. I mean, to the point where they tried to draft a couple guys and tried a couple free agent signings, and Eric Weddle did work out pretty darn well. And now they have Earl Thomas, who we'll see over the next few years. Made a Pro Bowl his first year. Probably wasn't the Earl Thomas of old. I think most people would probably say that, but they also gave him top-of-the-market money. So that's what you're missing when you lose players of this ilk. It's the leadership, it's the elite play, and it's also really trying to replace that. And it's one thing to have someone else line up there. It's another thing to have someone else there that you can just plug in and you don't worry about. I mean, that's the one thing that I thought C.J. Mosley never got enough credit for was. And keep in mind, there was a 1-year buffer where Darryl Smith did a nice job, so I think it's important to tip your cap to him as well. But the Ravens were able to bring in C.J. Mosley, who was never Ray Lewis. I want to be clear about that. And I'll even hear some people say that he was a little overrated when you consider he wasn't as good in pass coverage. I'll hear some of that. But at the same time, they drafted him, they plugged him in there, and you didn't worry about that spot for the 5 years he was here. I mean, that was just, you didn't worry about that spot. And he wasn't the absolute best in the game, but when you have a position that you don't have to think about anymore, that makes it so much easier for the front office and the coaching staff to go about the rest of their business of team building. And that's where the Ravens didn't have to worry about right guard. They haven't worried about that since 2011, the first year that he settled in to play in that spot full time. So you're talking about 9 years now, almost a decade, where for the first time, not counting an injury situation, they're having to think about what right guard's going to look like. So they'll have a plan, but
I got a plan. I just realized we had this incredible conversation with Marshal Yanda up at Greenmount Station. Remember that?
Yeah, that was, I believe that was, 2016. That was the year that his shoulder was hurt. He was on the verge of going to IR. And I believe, if memory serves me right, I thought even maybe his wife even talked about the possibility of playing the other side. Or maybe he talked about it with his wife. I can't remember the exact details, but he went from right guard to left guard to protect his shoulder. And he played left guard at a Pro Bowl caliber the rest of the year. So, and anyone who plays offensive line at a high level, they tell you it's very much, not exactly the same, but very much like if you're right-handed, you start having to do everything left-handed, where, all right, you might be able to make it manage, but it's very awkward. And, well, he didn't look awkward doing it. So just another great story, a great example of the player that he was. And everyone, of course, remembers the taser story from way back when, just a reminder about how tough he was, how tough he is, and again, one of the best and easily one of the toughest players to ever play for the Baltimore Ravens as they approach their 25th season here in Baltimore.
Well, I just found all the Yanda files, so y'all are going to get some Marshal Yanda up in the BuyAToyota.com audio vault as well. Hey, man, Terps, and we got local basketball, and we got the Orioles and the Trey Mancini situation. And by the way, Luke and I are not touching anymore. We're doing all radio via satellite because of the coronavirus, right?
There you go. And the new policy for reporters and covering teams have to be 6 feet away. So we'll have that covered. But
anything you want to say about banning all media from the locker room?
I mean, look.
It's created some comedy for me. You know, I asked Ken Rosenthal, does he like how it feels? It's been going on for me for 15 years. So
I'll say this. Look, I think we all need to be realistic and understanding about what not just the country but the entire world's dealing with the coronavirus. But there's also the unsettling feeling of whenever you're restricting media access, and whether that you could say it's temporary, but we also know that teams across the board in every sport have chipped away at access over the years, and you just, you don't want to see a situation where teams are like, oh, we like not having reporters in the locker room or clubhouse, and we'll keep it this way. And what I'd say to that is, you might think, fans might say, oh, no big deal, whatever, but you have better coverage when you have better access, and you have better stories to read and better anecdotes to hear on the radio and things of that nature. So I'm not surprised by it, given the reality of what we're seeing in other countries. I mean, Italy shut down entirely right now. I mean, not just sports.
Dude, don't get me started on Pearl Jam, right?
Yeah. So I mean, so that's where I think the sports media have to be understanding in the short term, but I also understand long term. Let's not make a habit of this for restricting access.
There you go. Spoken like a true Pro Football Writers Association card holder. We'll talk to Chris Pike about that as well. Luke Jones can be found at Baltimore Luke, out on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, wherever the Ravens are, he'll be 6 feet away. Wherever the Terps are, we'll be watching on television. Nasty at WNST.net, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, from Indianapolis to Baltimore and back. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Taos in Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.